Hi, folks. This is Abel James, and thanks so much for joining us on the award-winning Fat Burning Man Show, where we talk about real food and real results. I'm going to start today with a fun fact, and this is according to calculations from the CDC. If you are a man over 7 feet tall, aged 20 to 40, there is a 17% likelihood that you're in the NBA. Think about that for a second. I think that's pretty awesome. I'm not so sure about the math there, but I actually found it on Sports Illustrated. So I think there's some element of truth to it just because there are so few people over 7 feet tall. But that's right. If you're a man over 7 feet tall, age 20 to 40, there's a 17% likelihood you're in the NBA. So my guest this week is Dr. Joel Fuhrman, and you folks have been asking for him for quite some time after seeing him on the Dr. Oz show and in so many other places on and off the internet. He's been a major player and someone who's very well respected for a long time. Dr. Fuhrman is here to talk about his unabashed take on nutrition and what it means to you. And so specifically, we're going to be talking about some things that if you're paleo or ancestral, he's going to stomp on it a little bit. And I think that we all need that to keep us all honest. But the one thing that we all agree on, no matter which guest has been on my show, pretty much every health expert agrees that we should be eating more green leafy veggies. So that's my challenge to you today, and one that you'll be hearing quite a bit about in this interview with Dr. Fuhrman. Before we get to it, I have a quick announcement, and that's that finally I can say I am doing a book with Penguin, and it's coming out in early 2015. It looks like April, and it's called The Wild Diet. And so right now, I'm under deadline, writing very, very quickly, as much as I can. So you might not see me as much on social media or out in the world or away from my little notebook writing on it. But I can say that I'm really excited to make you guys a part of the process of writing this book. So within my Fat Burning Tribe community on Facebook and at fatburningtribe.com, I'm going to be sending you guys portions of the book to look at ahead of time and asking you questions to see if you want to be featured. Also, if you act on this quickly, we're putting together 40 feasts for the book, and we would love to feature your recipes. So if there's something you're really proud of, go to fatburningman.com, sign up for the email list, and we're sending out the instructions for how you can help contribute to the book. I really look forward to building this awesome work with you. So that's really exciting. I'm going to be busy for a little while, but there's a lot of really cool stuff coming up. So thank you so much for your support. If you dig the show, as always, please leave a review and share it with your friends and family and anyone you think would appreciate it. All right, so on to the show with Dr. Fuhrman. We talk about why the real goal of healthy nutrition is longevity, not fitness, how paleo and fad diets have it wrong and what to do about it, why you might want to look at legumes if you want to live longer, and much more. All right, let's go hang out with the doc. Hi, folks. Dr. Joel Fuhrman is a family physician, New York Times bestselling author, and nutritional researcher with a focus on reversing disease naturally using nourished foods. More importantly, Dr. Fuhrman is a former professional figure skater. How's it going, Dr. Fuhrman?
I'm doing great. Great to be here.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on. Now, I would love just to start right off with that interesting little tidbit of information that you are a former professional figure skater. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and what your experience was like?
Sure. Well, I spent most of my teenage years, training in ice skating. I was a pair skater with my sister Gail. Mm-hmm. And in 1973, we were second in the U.S. National Pairs Championships.
Wow.
And I competed internationally and, traveled all through Europe, competed in Czechoslovakia in the World Championships. I was then, in those days, it was very different than it is today because you couldn't accept any money and still compete in the Olympics and internationally. The minute you turned pro, you were out of competition.
Yeah.
So so at the age of, I guess, 20 or 21, I turned pro and then competed in the World Professional Championships in Jaca, Spain. And then after that, so I was actually, when I was competing in figure skating, I was still going to college at the same time, whereas most other skaters were not doing that. So it was kind of tough.
Wow.
It was actually, I think it was more difficult to be a world-class competitor in an athletic endeavor and still maintain good college grades.
Yeah.
That was tougher than going to medical school.
Really?
So medical school was much easier than that because I didn't have to skate, I didn't have to train 6 hours a day and still study, you know what I mean?
I love it. That's awesome. It seems like you've definitely found your own path in so many different ways. So What I love doing is having people who are examples of awesome doctors on the show, because right now I think a lot of people have kind of been led down the path of pill popping as opposed to really taking their health into their own hands. So it's wonderful to have a person like you on who really has chosen a path as a doctor that is commendable, and someone who I'd recommend to basically, if you had the bandwidth, I would recommend everyone come see you as a doctor. How can we take the state of the industry as it stands right now and create more doctors who are doing great work like you? What's the natural next step?
Well, I have very different feelings. I think the medical profession has gone in the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, it's almost as if just imagine that everybody in America smoked cigarettes and we all put our money into looking for a cure for lung cancer so we can continue to smoke cigarettes.
Yeah.
When it would just, and it's a fairy tale. And the idea that you think you can abuse your body your whole life and take care of your health with a pill from a pharmaceutical company and not get lung cancer, breast cancer, heart disease, dementia, and strokes is insanity.
Yeah.
We have an insane medical and healthcare system. I think that it should be in grade school. It should be reading, writing, arithmetic, and nutritional science.
Yeah.
And I think that through, we graduate from high school, colleges, professional school, medical school, and the one factors, the scientific information that's so critical to controlling our destiny, whether we're going to be depressed, whether we're going to be able to be intelligent in life, or have a medical tragedy, or to be suffering from autoimmunity our whole life. In other words, the thing that controls our basic happiness and well-being, we don't know anything about.
Right.
And we're all left to the devices of people marketing gimmicks and fads and tricks to us, trying to take our money.
Right.
And we don't learn the basic science of nutrition. And I think we've gone in a complete wrong direction. We could have a complete different society if things worked out differently. So I'm here with a voice, trying to respect as many people as I can and say that optimal nutrition is tremendously powerful. It has a tremendously profound implication, whether it's on our economy, our environment, our health, our longevity, our ability to make a living, our emotional well-being. It permeates all layers of our society in such profound way, and people are ignoring it and actually eating a diet that's creating so many problems for us in the modern world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've noticed, in your YouTube videos and a lot of your materials, you talk a lot about food. And I think that's one of the reasons that we're going to get along so well. But it's basically, as opposed to throttling people with intense science, I think that it can be useful to kind of take the opposite approach, because once people start experiencing eating real food and the effects that has on their energy, the way that they feel, the way that they think, and certainly body composition, everything starts to change. So what do you find is the best way to kind of get people who are within the medical system as it exists today, kind of pull them out of that into the world that we live in, eating real food and kind of knowing a little bit more about nutritional science?
I don't know for sure the right answer to that question, but I just know that generally speaking, physicians know about as much about nutrition as the average engineer, lawyer, school teacher, and college professor do. And, I find that as the general population improves their knowledge base, and as the general population becomes more informed, so does the medical profession. Mm-hmm. And for example, as the popularity of my message and work increases, I get more exposure to doctors, because the patients who got well expose their doctors to the work, and the doctors are exposed to the work just like the other people are, and they're excited about it, and they become fans and enthusiastic about nutrition and start using it in their medical practice. So I think that physicians are real people just like the rest of us, and a lot of them are just uninformed and been poorly educated in this subject matter, and to a degree almost misinformed. Mm-hmm. And they can learn and and a lot of them get excited about learning this information, just like the regular person out there on the street can. Yeah. So it's a broad array of possibilities, and I think that all the work that all of us do to instruct and bring the level of education of the population up has its effect on bringing the education of the medical community up as well at the same time.
Yeah. Now, what about the inherent problem with, say, there's theoretically speaking, there's a doctor who has been advocating one particular type of diet for a very long time, say it's low fat or calorie restricted or, high in whole grains or something else like that. What about the issue with the flip-flopping? If they all of a sudden say, well, I'm anti-grains, don't eat any sugar, this medication that I had you on before, that might not have been right, so let's try this other sort of intervention. That opens them up to all sorts of lawsuits and issues with credibility. What's, in your opinion, what's your stance on that? How can we solve that problem of, even if someone does know that there might be a better way as a doctor, how can they kind of make that transition?
No, I particularly don't think that's a problem.
Okay.
I don't necessarily agree with you on that. I think that, I consider myself a physician and a scientist.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not an ethicist. I'm not an environmentalist. I'm not a philosopher.
Sure.
My job is really to look at the subject matter in the most unbiased and scientific way possible, through logic and weighing the preponderance of the evidence and giving people the best advice I can.
Mm-hmm.
And science changes when more information is available. And the drugs doctors use today aren't the same drugs and surgical procedures they used 20 years ago or even 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Things improve and mutate, and the information we give people has to change as more information is available. And doctors aren't, excuse me, I have to stop my
Sure.
phone. So, doctors aren't, what's the word, against changing their advice or necessarily changing what they do as better information becomes available. That's the problem is people's egos get involved, right? Because people who write books or give presentations, who
Sure.
are public figures, they don't like to admit they were wrong, number one. And so many people have some predetermined philosophy that they're trying to prove, instead of being completely unbiased with no predetermined philosophies, so you can more accurately ascertain the quality of the study you're looking at, or or look at all the information before you make a decision.
Yeah.
So that's really something I'm trying to teach and pride myself on, is that the best information is available to people when they haven't made up their minds in advance before they review all the evidence.
Yeah.
And when you do review all the evidence, you have a better opportunity to come to the better choices, better conclusions.
Sure. Now, where do you get your information? How do you spend most of your time? Is it reading books on PubMed or deep in the research? What does it look like?
That's right. It's reviewing all the research. In other words, there are certain services and that can send you any new study that comes out today. We can read, or this week, so any study being published in human research affecting human nutrition is being able to review not just the abstract, but the whole study.
Yeah.
And because the more information you have, the more you can better explain the science to people. Because I found that the more information you give people about the science, the more it motivates them, and the more it gives them security in the foundation of the knowledge, and it gives them more inertia and more ability to change their life in the right direction.
Yeah.
So part of it is having an adequate knowledge base of the science that's out there, so you can interpret it, because people have gone in such wrong directions.
Right.
And you're actually having to counter these belief systems people have about food and all the fad diets that are out there, whether it's extremely low fat, or whether it's paleo, or whether it's Dukan or South Beach, or whatever the popular diet is, wheat belly, or whatever is going around today. You have to be able to explain to people why those presentations are not accurate, they're not consistent with the science that's out there, and it's leading people in a way that's not optimal or most favorable, and why.
Yeah.
Because you can't just say, don't do that, listen to me. You have
Right.
to really have the science to document what you're saying.
Sure. So we have a lot of folks who listen to the show who are, paleo or CrossFitters, a lot of people who are vegans now or former vegans, vegetarians, kind of across the board. Atkins, South Beach, The Zone, a lot of people have histories with a lot of those and might even be on some of those diets now. What do you recommend to people who might be following something that is dogmatic or was written in one particular book or comes from one particular source? How do they find the truth in all of this?
Right. I think the problem is that you gave an example of all diet styles that I would not recommend, right?
Okay.
That I don't think are ideal and
Sure.
potentially harmful. And the reason for that is because they're foundational based on a premise or a hypothesis or a story.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take paleo as a story. And most anthropologists may not agree with that story, but that's irrelevant whether they agree or disagree. Whether that story is true or not is almost irrelevant.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really matter what a certain group ate back then. It matters like what does the preponderance of evidence show today. So if you're trying to prove a story, then you're going to look for evidence that supports that story, and you're going to try to disregard, negate, and make less of, or you're going to have a bias to try to collect things to support that story and negate things that instead of having no story and no predetermined agenda, and say, well, let's look at the evidence in an unbiased manner.
Right.
And if you do that, you have to come to a different conclusion. You can't come to that conclusion. So I think that people have food preferences, and they very often have a way they would prefer to eat, and they're looking to justify their food preferences with their selective review of information to justify their predetermined beliefs. And unfortunately, that leads people down the wrong road.
Yeah.
Because I think we're even asking the wrong questions. Let me give you an example, okay?
Yeah.
The question is, I'm let's say I'm doing a debate, and I'm picked to be a debater against somebody doing the paleo and somebody doing the metro, and I'm saying, so you have on one person advocating a diet that's 75% of calories from animal products, and another person advocating a diet with zero animal products, and you're trying to see which is right? Well, shouldn't even be the debate. The debate should be what degree of, let's look at the evidence here and try to ascertain what amount of animal products in a diet would still be safe and what threshold would start to push it up into dangerous levels of where disease causation. So you have people denying that animal products in any way, at any amount, has any problem.
Sure.
Well, that's not a scientist. That's a person with a predetermined who can't, anything they say is of no value at all because they've got an agenda.
Yeah.
And then you got a person looking to say that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the point is that instead of debating one side, which is what happens in these shows, anything we do is a debate.
Right.
You have one people advocating one side and one people advocating another side. Instead of let's try to review the evidence we have and be inquisitive, open-minded, and see where does the evidence lead us if we don't have some predetermined agenda.
Yeah.
And to a degree, a different person, a different lifestyle, a different age in life may have the answer be a little bit different depending on what your objectives are. But we still have to have, and my objective is predominantly enabling a person to live to be 95 to 105 years old in good health. My objective is not who's going to be the best linebacker on the football team and weigh 250 pounds or be able to bench press the most weight. No, not if that's going to make you die in your 60s.
Yeah.
I want a person to be able to live to be 100. And so if we isolate the question to what you need to do throughout life to live to be 100, you get a completely different answer.
Yeah.
So I think, and certainly cavemen did not live to be 100, and certainly I'd rather go through the science we have available today than ask some caveman for his opinion. And of course his diet is based on what was available wherever he lived, and was different so the whole idea of that there was a certain diet people ate in those times is just wrong to begin with. People ate whatever they could eat to survive, and their goal was to survive and to reproduce. It wasn't really to live to be 100. Now we're all surviving. We have that ability to get enough food. We don't have to eat what's available. We can eat what's best to survive to 100. And that's, I think, a different question, a different answer.
Sure. And that's such a great point. And I'm glad that we're talking about this now because I haven't really had a chance to talk about this before, but it's pretty easy to spot a lot of the folks who come out with a new diet book or this, radical or cutting edge program for losing weight or living a long time or what have you, because it's very clear that they started with that hypothesis or that theory and then just found a preponderance of garbage data in most cases to back it up. Or, some of it might be good because you can kind of find, it doesn't matter what the topic is, you can find something on either side if you look hard enough. And the problem is some of it's good and a lot of it's garbage. That's
exactly true. Yeah. And even the questions people ask, they'll say, what do you think about a Mediterranean diet? That's a question, right? That's not a scientific question. There's too many variables. There's good things and there's bad things. The whole diet is I don't have an opinion about what things that are a mixture of good and bad things. I can talk about what's good about it and what's bad about it.
Sure.
But it's not ideal because there's good things and bad things mixed together. That's like asking me, do I think it's good to people take a multivitamin or not? What do I think about people taking multivitamins? First of all, what multivitamin are you referring to?
Yeah.
And it has 26 different ingredients. There may be 4 ingredients that create increased risk of cancer and 3 that decrease risk of cancer.
Yeah.
I can't comment on 26 different variables. That's not a scientific question to be a person it's not an answer a person with scientific integrity should even be answering that question.
Yeah.
We should be saying, let's look at each individual ingredient, and I'll comment on all 26 ingredients and tell you what I think that's good or bad or not. But I can't tell you the whole thing together. There's too many different variables to study. Follow me?
Sure, absolutely. So what about for the people, though, who are just kind of dipping their toes into this and don't want to get bogged down into being a scientist themselves? These stories that are attached to some of these diets, say paleo, like the example you were using before. One thing that I try to do, especially for people as a shorthand, say eat foods that were recently alive and well. That are not the product of an industrialized food system or what have you. How do you approach the people who have little experience or little interest in learning the actual science behind it? In terms of your own messaging and stories.
I think it helps that people trust my message, as it makes logical sense.
Yeah.
Like one thing I teach people is let's eat foods that are high in micronutrients, and that foods that are processed foods are low in micronutrients. And we know that, for example, that antioxidants and phytochemicals are important for our longevity, right? And Americans don't eat them because Americans are eating 60% of processed foods and they're eating 30% of calories from animal products. And animal products and processed foods don't contain much antioxidants or phytochemicals. They're mostly in vegetation, and Americans are only eating about 5% of calories from unrefined plant food.
Yeah.
So one thing I think that everybody has to agree with, and most people do agree with, is that we need to eat more natural, unrefined plant foods.
Yeah.
And that includes fruits and vegetables, beans, nuts, and seeds, right? And so that's one thing. We all can agree that Americans need to eat less processed foods and more plant foods. Right? So that's number one. So I think that basically I try to have people to do 2 things. Have a lot of nutritional quality in their diet to make sure they improve the overall exposure to micronutrients without exceeding their macronutrient requirements, without it getting too many calories.
Sure.
If your calories are fixed or a reasonable level without getting excess calories, we want to get as much micronutrients as possible. Yeah. And number 2, we want to achieve comprehensive micronutrient adequacy. And that means not just have a high amount of micronutrients, but not be missing any micronutrients the body could utilize for its health and longevity. So have the breadth or the full, and number 3, let's not expose ourselves to foods that promote excessive hormones in the body that can promote cancer.
Yeah.
So using those 3 basic principles, then we could say, okay, so what type of foods should we mostly eat, and should we design a diet that'll establish those three principles that are pretty much acceptable to the vast majority of nutritional scientists, to top nutritional scientists the world over.
Yeah.
So there's really much less controversy out there in the true community of nutritional scientists than people would think, because it's these lay books, and it's the books that are popular in the New York Times bestseller list. It's that are making people confused and giving people ideas of individuals that are not consistent with the preponderance of agreement between most nutritional scientists. So.
Sure, absolutely. I would love to go back to point 2. What are the key nutrients that you see that a lot of people, say in the U.S. right now, are deficient in, that could focus on and what foods should they be eating to kind of fill in those gaps, or how should they supplement? Right,
exactly. I have some basic rules that I teach people, and number 1 is eat a big salad every day.
Yeah.
And I show people the size of the bowl they should eat of raw vegetables each day. And then in the bowl of raw vegetables with the dressing on top, and the dressing, by the way, should be made of nuts and seeds instead of oil. Oil is a processed food. I can't ever figure out how a paleo community recommending a natural diet could be putting coconut oil and all kinds of oils on their food when those things are processed foods. And the body, and we use nuts and seeds, like walnut is not a walnut oil, and olive is not olive oil, a coconut is not coconut oil. It's different body effect. One you digest in 3 minutes, it gets into your body, can't burn, it has to store it as fat, and the other one is stored for 2 to 3 hours.
Sure.
If it's a whole. It's completely different biology. But nevertheless, so I'm saying the dressing is important. It has to be healthy, made out of whole foods. But on the salad should be some raw onion, some tomato, some shredded cruciferous greens like cabbage or kale or bok choy or some kind of green.
Yeah.
And they're so in other words, one is a salad every day, because there are hundreds of studies showing that the amount of raw vegetables that your person consumes correlates with their lower rates of cancer and longevity in general. So that's one principle. That's one thing I think. Pretty simple. Eat a big salad every day.
Yeah. And in doing so, you'll push a lot of other things out.
That's right. It's as a main dish, not as a little side salad, but as a main dish. Now, on the salad should be a dressing made of nuts and seeds. So that means I might mix some tomato sauce with almonds and sunflower seeds and a little fig vinegar and a raisin or balsamic vinegar, and or it might be an orange with some cashews and toasted sesame seeds. I'll use whole nuts and seeds instead of the oil, because they're absorbed into the bloodstream over hours, not over minutes. So it's slow food, not fast food.
Yeah, I love
Whether
that.
fast food comes in as sugar or whether it comes in as oil, it still floods the bloodstream within 30 minutes. And when you flood the bloodstream with a caloric load, it pushes up fat storage hormones, and it also stimulates dopamine receptors in the brain, which make you want to overeat and causes food addictions.
Yeah.
When you eat natural plant foods, they're absorbed over many hours, and they don't have this, and the body can then burn them for energy and utilize them instead of storing them as fat, the same basic amount of calories, even though nuts and seeds don't have as many calories as oil anyway. But, I always say that, every tablespoon of oil has 120 calories. I mean, what kind of oil you're using. And if you're working behind a plow, with an ox and a plow 9 hours a day burning it, and you're slim, maybe it's not so bad. But if you're being sedentary, what are Americans doing with that extra 800 calories of oil that's absorbed in a minute after they ate the meal?
Yeah.
They're storing it as fat. It's like eating 10 chocolate chip cookies. Would they think they're not going to gain weight if they eat 10 chocolate chip cookies? It's the same thing. Where are they going to burn all those calories from?
But they're gluten-free, so they're health food.
What's that?
They're gluten-free cookies, though, so they're all health food.
and it's olive oil, so it's not fattening because it's on the Mediterranean diet,
Right.
But even Cookie Monster knows it's fattening.
I love that. What are some other... I love that you brought that up about the oil with paleo. Most people don't talk about that very often. What are some other examples of something that you see as a blatant contradiction that may be overlooked by people following story, whether it's paleo or some other?
Well, the main other thing with paleo is they're against people eating beans. Or maybe not all paleo people are. I don't really know that or not, but I know a lot of them are against beans. And I think that if there was one food most linked to longevity in elderly populations, it's beans. And lowering animal product protein and increasing plant protein in your diet is the secret to extending years to your life. So I think that beans are a food that's been shown to reduce risk of colon cancer, to help people control diabetes, to help reverse heart disease. I could say the more you eat beans, the more you get lean. The more you eat. So the point is, we have a superfood with documented longevity potential and anti-cancer effects. And no scientist in the world could say that taking beans out of the diet, no nutritional, if you're trying to make statements based on evidence, there's every study ever done showed beans extend lifespan. Never one showed any detriment. So to take that out of it, one of the most healthy foods you can eat out of a diet makes no sense at all. Then you're talking about religion, philosophy, belief systems. You're not talking about facts.
Sure.
To remove beans from a diet.
Now, so a lot of people who have written the books or come on the show and talked about legumes and beans and certainly grains have mostly talked about the phytic content, the anti-nutrients, as well as the starch in beans. Is there what happens when someone overeats beans or the beans aren't? What's the problem with beans right now?
That's a perfect example of people trying to tell a story.
Yeah.
Right? They're looking for reasons why beans aren't good so they can justify their story.
Sure.
Even what you just said makes no sense. Because, the phytic acid content, phytic acid is something that helps the body fight cancer and live longer.
Sure.
Is it good or is it bad? Well, I don't know if it's good or bad. Let's look what the science shows. Let's look at what the studies show. Why can't this person look at evidence? Why are they looking for a story? The evidence shows that for every 20 grams of increase in beans, longevity increases 8% in every population ever tested.
Wow.
If the theory, the hypothesis that phytic acid, which binds zinc, was bad, then why is people increased levels of beans in their diet living longer?
Sure.
And if you can criticize the the one study, can you criticize all studies, the thousands of studies that every one of them show positive effects? You can say they're all done wrong. But your hypothesis that phytic acid may be bad and beans the right one because you felt the caveman wasn't eating beans.
Right.
It's just that I don't see. So I would say, well, that's a theory that you think that might be bad, but we have to test the theory. To test the theory, let's see what the controlled trials show and what the epidemiologic studies show, because yours is just a theory.
Yeah. Oh, I love that we're talking about this. So, we've covered beans. What about grains?
Well, there's so much sloppy science in some of those books because I'm very much against refined grains.
Yeah.
And refining them isn't just necessarily turning them into white flour. Let's take a wheat berry and we make it into whole wheat flour. Well, that's processing it to a certain degree.
Yeah.
If the wheat berry was intact and not processed, and we just cooked it in water, it would come out like a wild rice. It wouldn't be bred into a fine flour.
Right.
But we can take the whole wheat flour, and we can make it into a whole wheat pastry flour. We can make it so it's even more finely ground, raising its glycemic effect even further. The point I'm making is that we can take that same substance before we even take anything out and make it white flour, and we can increase its glycemic potential just by grinding it more finely. Did you follow that?
Yeah.
So the glycemic load of grains is not as favorable as beans, but it's a tremendous variance based on how fine. So if you're using an intact grain like steel cut oats, it's probably better than oatmeal, which is better than oat flour, which is still better than white flour.
Yep.
So there's such a wide spectrum of what's available in the grain field, whether it's steel cut oats or whether it's black or wild rice compared to white rice. So I think that there's nothing wrong with the moderate use of intact whole grains.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with the moderate use of intact whole grains.
Now, what about starch, generally speaking? Because and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I think I hear you're saying, and I totally agree, is that instead of having these classifications of different food types that we're worrying about, we should really be worrying about the difference between intact, as you said, whole grains or whole foods or whole legumes, whole whatever, whole coconuts instead of the oil. Worrying ourselves with that, eating those whole foods, as opposed to the fractionated kind of frankenfoods that the further we go away from those whole foods kind of get us into trouble no matter what food type it is. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So we agree on that. And that's a great, you explained that very articulately. And I should say that if you read the book, which I did read the book, the Wheat Belly, was it called?
Yeah. Dr. Davis was on the show a while back.
So it was the science was very sloppy. And because he confused, he didn't understand that concept. He looked studies that looked at different types of grains. Refined grains said it was bad, and that means you shouldn't eat. And he didn't understand that the studies on intact grains were different from the studies on refined grains. And he took some studies based on refined white flour and tried to use it to justify why a person shouldn't be eating any grain from this, And then later on in the book, he might say, well, you shouldn't eat any refined white rice either. It's probably, and then in other words, the book did not make any logic. It wasn't written in a logical fashion. He didn't differentiate between intact grains and refined grains and white flour. He didn't differentiate between the effect of gluten and the glycemic effect. He mixed it all together to just sort of justify an argument. So it really was just sloppy science.
Sure. I really appreciate how honest you're being. But we're running out of time, but I want to make sure that we talk about longevity specifically. Especially around the issues of caloric restriction and fasting, which I get questions about all the time, especially as they relate to longevity. Would you mind talking about that? The fact that restricting calories over the long term, a lot of people kind of do that to increase their lifespans. What is the best way to increase longevity, and how does caloric restriction and fasting enter into that?
I think the most effective way to increase longevity is to follow my recommendations for a nutritarian diet based with a preponderance of natural plant foods. And I think that restricting your animal protein intake is more conducive to longevity than fasting would be. Let me say that again.
Okay.
That I'm agreeing to you that episodically fasting most likely extends lifespan, most likely in humans. But the most effective thing to reduce to effect that we know can extend lifespan is keeping IGF-1 in a favorable range, especially until the age of about 70, not keeping IGF-1 below 150. And what accelerates aging would be one of these popular high protein diets like Atkins, Paleo, Dukan, because some of these paleo advocates recommend the American diet is 30% of calories from animal products. And some of the paleo advocates are recommending 50 to 80% of calories from animal products. So I'm saying that if we had an objectivity for the lifespan and slowing the aging process, we'd have to say that IGF-1 is promoting aging, and we'd have to lower animal products to a more conservative level that's most likely around somewhere between 5 and 10% of calories not to raise IGF-1. That level is still not, there have not been so much studies to determine that accurately. The question is how much animal products are still safe when you're talking about living to 100, not safe if you're living to 70, and you can eat, but safe if living to be 100. And then the question is, once you've cut back, once your diet is largely intact plant foods with a limited amount of animal products, then would fasting episodically add additional lifespan benefits? And the answer is likely it would. But I think that the first thing I'm mentioning is the whole foods and keeping animal products low would be much more powerful than fasting would be. And then fasting would be something additional you could add that might add potential longevity effects on top of that, but wouldn't be as great as the nutritarian diet.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm basing this judgment based on, on looking at what's available in animal studies and human studies.
Sure. Now, in the animal studies, I know that there's another issue with the science, which is, a similar thing that you talked about before with the whole grains versus the refined grains. There's a similar issue with, natural, in the true sense of the word, animal products that, are wild fish that were healthy, or pasture raised cattle as opposed to, cattle from an industrialized system. One of the issues right now that I know a lot of people are running into is that we don't really have a lot of good science from healthy animal protein, and in a similar way that we don't have it from healthy other sorts of foods as well. What's your stance on that? Like, how can we,
I don't really agree with that.
Okay.
Because I think that it's well recognized that pollution and chemicals and commercialism of food and pollution leads to health problems, right?
Sure.
And a farm-raised salmon may have more dioxin than a piece of commercially raised beef even.
Right.
So we have to look at contamination of food, and we have some of that data. And we also have data from early civilizations and from studies that show that animal products, even non-commercially raised, even grass-fed, even wild animal products, still promote premature death. I think that controversy is concocted in the paleo community to say that there's not evidence to suggest that the safer animal products cause any problems, when I think that there's an overwhelming amount of evidence that high protein is high protein. And as you push protein to a higher level, whether it be clean fish or a chicken you raise in your backyard, you still should be minimizing your exposure to those foods, because we have too much data to suggest it affects hormones directly. Not from the hormone that's in the food, but the hormones the body responds to the high protein intake.
Sure.
That is too much, and it has to do with the mechanism which raises IGF-1 is the high degree of biological protein, not whether the animal was polluted or not. But we all agree, of course, that it's much healthier if we're eating frogs and salamanders and insects. It's much healthier to eat naturally raised animal products.
Yeah. Did some of that in Thailand. It was pretty interesting. Not the frogs.
I think salamanders, snakes, frogs, and insects would probably be more natural than a cow would be to eat. What do you think?
Well, in some ways, certainly. Now, what about so what you brought up before, the person who plays football, the athlete who's fueling primarily with a lot of protein and probably a lot of carbs throughout their career, but dying early, as opposed to someone who's avoiding animal proteins. What's the trade-off, but living for a long time? What's the trade-off there? It sounds like, are you sacrificing performance by going after longevity, or what? No. I mean, what does that look like?
You're not sacrificing performance if your performance was ability to run fast, to play tennis, to ski, or to play basketball. But you would be sacrificing performance if you were trying to be a power lifter or a linebacker on a football team.
Okay.
Because you're not going to get to be 250 pounds eating plant foods. No way, unless you're really doing some kind of supplemental with stuff. On natural foods, you're not going to be 250 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
The average 6 foot guy or 5'10" to 6 foot guy would be between 160 and 180 pounds.
Yeah.
You're going to be. There's plenty of great athletes in that body size, but you're not going to be able to play professional football in that body size.
Mm-hmm.
So I think yes, you'll. But we know already that the linebackers on football teams have the shortest lifespan of all people in North America.
Right.
The goal, and it's not so advantageous to be necessarily a power lifter or a bodybuilder. You can be ripped, and I'm 60 and have a six pack. You want to see my stomach? So I can do 70 push-ups and 20 chins, and I can be fit. I'm 60 years old and can jump up and down on the desk 20 times in a row, and I can do mogul skiing, but I'm not going to be able to bench press 200 pounds, or 300 pounds. You know what I mean? I'm not going to be that size, and my diet limits me to my growth. It doesn't limit me to my stamina and my physical and keeping my youthful vigor into my later years, but it can limit me as to how much my muscles can grow. Because I'm not eating enough animal protein to maximize the size of my chest. I'm just not. Yeah. But I'd rather sacrifice the size of my chest to live longer.
Okay. So what would you say to someone who is chasing after that right now, to have that big chest, to have that huge body, or to get ripped and have huge muscles? What would you say to them from the seat that you're sitting in right now?
I would say that my concern would be you'd be increasing your risk of prostate cancer as a male by trying to put on that much muscle. And for me, I'd rather see you be 10 pounds lighter and still be ripped.
Yeah.
Why don't you sacrifice a little bit of strength in the bench press department, but I'll assure you could do more chins. Like I can do more chins than most guys can. Probably any 60-year-old can do more chins than they can do.
Right.
I'm stronger for my body weight, but I'm not going to bench press more because I'm strong for my weight, but I'm not strong because I don't weigh that much. I only weigh 150 pounds.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the point is, I say I can make you stronger as far as box jumping, and I can make you stronger as far as chins, but you're going to lose a little your bench press department. But wouldn't that be worth it for your health and longevity and your ability not to get prostate cancer and benign prostatic hypertrophy where you can't pee and need procedures? The point is that your prostate's going to enlarge from you pushing the animal protein too high because it's going to cause cellular replication when you promote muscle growth. You're promoting too much muscle growth, which unfortunately promotes things that you don't want to grow too.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, this is so great. Thank you so much. We're out of time. Let's talk about where people can find you, your book, and all the awesome work that you're doing. What's coming up?
Thank you. Well, my website is drfuhrman.com, which is drfuhrman.com. My new book that just came out is called The End of Dieting, and I have 8 or 9 books I've written. And I also have a new show I'm working on PBS that I have in my old show the last few years. But I have a new television show that's going to be filmed this month and coming out in summer of 2014 called, I think it's called Never Diet Again. No, it's called something like that. But anyway, so I have a lot of exciting things I'm working on. And also I'm involved as the director of the Nutritional Research Foundation, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. And I'm very much actively involved in my time in doing research on human nutrition and supporting researchers around the country to do nutrition to show that optimal nutrition can be used therapeutically to reverse disease.
Yes.
It's not just preventative. It can be used as an intervention instead of using medications to get people better from diabetes and heart disease and autoimmune disease and headaches and prevent cancer. So I'm actively involved in research in that field.
Wow. Well, I love it. Anyone who hasn't checked out Dr. Fuhrman's work, please go to his website right now. It's absolutely fantastic. Your book is great as well. I definitely recommend it, especially people who might feel like they're caught up in some of the stories. Doesn't really matter which diet it is. There's good and bad with a lot of them. And I think the more that we can revisit science, actual science, good science, the more we'll be leading ourselves down the path of truth. So Dr. Fuhrman, thank you so much for coming on. This has been great. I would love to have you on again soon.
I'd love to. It was fun. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.